Korea, once a united nation, now divided in two. A land that shares a common culture and language, yet families are torn apart across these two regions. The constant threat looms, and the border is heavily militarized. While there is no active fighting at the moment, propaganda is always present. It's a battle of symbols. Who has the tallest flagpole? Who can blast the loudest music? But how and why did this region split into two separate states, North and South Korea? This division was the result of a complex mix of historical, political, and ideological factors.
North Korea has sent more of its trash-carrying balloons across the border.
A young soldier risking his life driving across the no man's land of the DMZ, crashing his Jeep and making a run for it.
North Korea has test-fired a suspected intercontinental ballistic missile.
South Korea's military says it is, quote, fully ready to respond.
Kim Jong-un threatens the United States with nuclear weapons
as a hostile state.
After it blew up parts of two major roads.
Leader Kim Jong-un said he wanted to increase the country's stockpile,
saying the country's leadership would rather eat grass than abandon its nuclear program.
For centuries, Korea was an independent kingdom with its own culture, language, and government. However, at the beginning of the 20th century, Korea increasingly fell under the influence of Japan, which was expanding its empire in East Asia at that time. In 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea, making it a colony. Over the next 35 years, Korea endured harsh and oppressive Japanese rule. World War II broke out, and with Japan's defeat in 1945, Korea was liberated from Japanese control. But the immediate question was, who would govern Korea now? Since Korea didn't have its own functioning government at that time, the country was temporarily divided along the 38th parallel, a line that cut the peninsula roughly in half. This arbitrary line, chosen by the Americans and approved by the Soviets, the two most powerful nations at the time, was not based on cultural, linguistic, or geographical boundaries. The idea was that this would be a temporary division. The Soviet Union occupied the north, while the south came under American control. This division was meant to be a temporary measure until a stable Korean government could be established. However, the geopolitical context of the time, marked by the rise of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, complicated the situation significantly. The Cold War was an ideological battle between communism, led by the Soviet Union, and capitalism, led by the United States. Both superpowers saw Korea as a strategic location in their global conflict and were determined to maintain and expand their influence in their respective zones. In the years following World War II, several attempts to reunite Korea under a single government failed. The ideological differences between the Soviet Union and the United States were too great, and neither superpower was willing to risk losing their influence in Korea and the surrounding area. This eventually led to the establishment of two separate states in 1948, North Korea, led by Kim Il-sung and supported by the Soviet Union, and South Korea, led by Syngman Rhee and backed by the United States. North Korea developed into a communist state, while South Korea opted for a capitalist system. Kim Il-sung wanted to bring all of Korea under communist rule and was not afraid to use force. He sought support from the Soviet Union, but they refused, fearing a major war with the United States, which was defending South Korea's interests. China was also not an available ally for North Korea at the time, due to its own ongoing civil war, so North Korea held back for the time being. Everything changed quickly in 1950 due to three key developments. Soviet spies had intercepted information that the Americans did not consider South Korea particularly important and might not intervene in a war. Additionally, the Soviet Union had developed nuclear weapons which were intended to intimidate the Americans. Finally, China had just won its civil war, with Mao Zedong, the communist leader, taking power. With stability restored in China, North Korea could now count on their support. The Soviets approved an invasion, sending weapons but no manpower. In June 1950, North Korean troops invaded South Korea, marking the start of the Korean War. However, North Korea and the Soviets had miscalculated. North Korea had nearly taken control of the entire peninsula when, unexpectedly, the United States and the United Nations intervened. Not what North Korea expected. The scale of the bombing campaigns that followed was unprecedented. Cities, dams, power plants, everything was leveled. Almost nothing was left standing. The war lasted 3 years and resulted in millions of deaths. The front lines eventually stabilized near the original 38th parallel, where an armistice was signed in 1953. Although a formal peace treaty was never signed, the fighting ceased, and Korea was effectively divided into 2 separate states with a heavily fortified border and a 4-kilometer-wide buffer zone, the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ'd. Since the Korean War, North and South Korea have taken fundamentally different paths. North Korea remained a tightly controlled communist state with a dynastic dictatorship. Under the leadership of Kim Il-sung, followed by his son Kim Jong-il and grandson Kim Jong-un, the country has remained politically isolated and economically underdeveloped, with a strong focus on military power and nuclear development. South Korea, on the other hand, experienced remarkable economic growth, often referred to as the miracle on the Han River. The country transformed from a war-torn, impoverished nation in the 1950s into one of the most advanced and prosperous economies in the world through hard work. This was accompanied by a gradual democratization process, and today South Korea is considered one of the most stable democracies in Asia. The division of Korea is a direct result of the geopolitical tensions of the Cold War and the conflicts between communism and capitalism. Although the Cold War has largely subsided since the late 20th century, the division of Korea remains one of its most visible and persistent legacies. The ongoing tension on the Korean peninsula, the starkly different political systems, and the economic divide between North and South Korea make peaceful reunification unlikely in the short term. Despite periods of dialogue and rapprochement, the division of Korea remains a complex and painful symbol of a conflict that continues to influence the world. Will there ever be reconciliation and a return to a united Korean kingdom? What do you think? Let us know.